share with you some of the things that we have been making lately around here for our large family. I love the seasonality of foods, and cozy, comforting soups and stews are perfect this time of year. First up, I'm going to make some homemade bone broth that I'll use later to make stew. A lot of times I just throw bones and water in a pot, put it on simmer, and just let it simmer for a really long time, sometimes days. Today, I'm going to add a few more little things to it to make it more flavorful and make the house smell absolutely delicious, which this very much accomplishes. It's also a really great way to use up some of your veggie scraps. So the top parts of celery, ends of carrots, the peels even of an onion. You don't have to have fresh chopped veggies. You can just use leftover things that you've collected. I add my veggies to some beef soup bones, water, and I'm going to let that simmer for a couple days. Over on farmhouseonboone.com, I have a recipe for classic Dutch oven beef stew, which really hits the spot this time of year. It comes together with some very simple ingredients that you likely already have in your pantry, freezer, and fridge. With homemade bone broth, fresh veggies, it is nourishing and comforting as well. Sometimes I'll serve this with sourdough toast or some honey wheat dinner rolls. It's delicious all on its own as well. The full directions and recipe amounts are over on farmhouseonboone.com, but if you like to wing things, kind of like I do, it's really simple. There's really no need to measure. I start by browning up stew meat with a little bit of oil or butter to give it some more flavor. Now you could just put stew meat directly into broth with the veggies and make this a one-pot meal, quick on the fly, but it does give more flavor when you saute things or brown things, sear things in fat. I set the meat aside and then bring a bit of flavor and color to the veggies by sauteing them and some of the beef juices and fats that remain in the pan. Adding more butter is always going to make stuff more delicious. I like to add a bit of flour to the vegetables and the butter to thicken it. Once it all simmers in the broth, the flour will cook and make it a bit thicker, which really adds a lovely consistency. I also add some seasonings and salt. I add the beef back, the broth. I'm gonna let that simmer. Now, here's the thing about using whole grain flour for thickening things. I have discovered, because I've done that a bunch and it's fine, it makes it a little bit interesting with all of the bran. And that's the one place where I'm like, you know what? I think for the difference in texture and consistency, I'm going to stick with either all-purpose or einkorn for those types of applications. Though I do it, I make gravies and all of that with whole grain, it's just not quite the same. I think those of you who do use whole grain to thicken might understand what I'm saying. I have prioritized health and ingredients as far as cooking in our home for many years now, from fermenting vegetables to milling whole grains. One thing I've felt like I should incorporate, but felt a little overwhelmed on the how-to and didn't have much accountability, is in implementing a regular, consistent workout into my schedule. And I want to tell you about today's video sponsor, Trainwell. Trainwell is an app that solves that problem for me. They match you with a personal trainer based on a quiz that you take. So you share your goals and how you hope to improve, whether you are someone who is seasoned in fitness and working out, or someone who, like me, has really lacked in this area since probably I was a teenager. I don't think I've really done much working out at all. Though I know as I get older, increasing my strength is going to be so important for my health. So once you are paired with the perfect trainer for your needs, you then do an onboarding call to talk with them personally about your goals and your needs and what will fit into your schedule. So if you've been working out a while, your trainer will know to start you at a higher level. If you are brand new, you might only start with 2 20-minute workouts per week, something that can doably fit into your schedule and with your level of fitness. And then after after each workout in the app, there's communication with your trainer to designate that the workout was either too easy, too hard, to make sure that you're on the right path to improving and strengthening and growing, but not too hard and beyond your skill level. For me, I had such a hard time maintaining consistency. I've also worried a bit about hurting myself physically because I've had so many children. I want to make sure to not disrupt any of the muscles that might still be healing. And Trainwell paired me with a personal trainer that takes all of that into consideration. Take the quiz to find your perfect trainer and get 14 days of free training with my link, go.trainwell.net/farmhouseonboone. I'll also leave it linked to the description box below, or grab the QR code here. Again, thank you so much, Trainwell, for sponsoring today's video. Something else that we have been loving in our home is a new recipe on farmhouseonboone.com, blueberry coffee cake. It has quickly become a family favorite. Of course, it's sourdough blueberry coffee cake, and of course, I'm going to adapt it to whole grain. Now, since I do stock hard white wheat berries and soft white wheat berries, if this is brand new to you, check back out some of my previous videos. I talk all about why you would use one over the other. Actually, better yet, head to my podcast with Sue Becker. So search Simple Farmhouse Life, Sue Becker, either here on YouTube or Google it. We have an episode where we talk all about wheat. If you want to know which kind of wheat berries are better for which applications, but for a quick bread, cake style recipe like this, I am using soft white wheat. This recipe is delicious. It combines sour cream, sourdough, blueberries, the whole grain wheat. It's delicious enough to be dessert, but also nourishing enough to feel good about it. So you can go to farmhouseonboone.com, search blueberry coffee cake to get the full recipe. But essentially, I am mixing up some butter, sugar, brown sugar, sour cream, eggs, vanilla, sourdough starter, and milk in my mixer. And then for the dry ingredients, salt, baking soda, baking powder, whole grain flour. Now the thing I do when I'm substituting soft white wheat berries for all-purpose, I do an additional 1/4 cup of flour per 1 cup the recipe calls for. So this calls for 3 cups of all-purpose flour. So I am doing 3 3/4 cups of freshly milled soft white wheat berries. Again, more explanation on this whole conversion thing over on that Sue Becker podcast. But just for the Cliff Notes version, when you do hard white wheat, you can substitute it 1 for 1 for all-purpose. If you're doing soft white wheat, add an additional 1/4 cup of flour per cup the recipe calls for. Now notice I used up almost the entire jar of my sourdough starter. That's okay. There's still a little bit clinging to all the sides and bottom of the jar. When I add some fresh flour and water, it will spring back to life. I actually really enjoy reducing my starter down to almost nothing regularly, because it gives the yeast remaining plenty to feed on and it makes it active and robust. So I'm making this recipe exactly as it is on farmhouseonboone.com, except for subbing in that soft white wheat for the flour instead of all-purpose and adding an additional 1/4 cup per cup. Hope that makes sense. It's actually really straightforward once you get used to doing it in your own kitchen, and I think it really pays off in health benefits. Of course, I fold in some blueberries. There's a crumb topping that gets layered. It bakes up in a little less than an hour and your family is going to love it. Sauerkraut is something that we have regularly around our home because It is so easy to make. It requires really no special tools. There's a few things I'm going to use, but even those are somewhat optional. They're cheap, they're easy to acquire, so I would recommend them. But we're essentially just taking cabbage and salt and thyme, T-I-M-E. You could probably add T-H-Y-M-E and it'd be delicious, but I'm talking about T-I-M-E, and allowing it to do its fermentation work on this vegetable to transform it into something that tastes good with nearly everything you will make in your kitchen, plus add the gut health benefits of a fermented food. I like sauerkraut because of the simplicity. There are so many different fermented foods that you can make in your kitchen. I've made them, I've used them to preserve food from the garden, because you can take something that was going to spoil in a couple weeks, ferment it, it'll last 9 months plus. So it's great for that short-term garden preservation, not like years like canning will be, but at least for extended periods of time to get you through to the next growing season. However, all that to say, I like to stick with what is easy and what I know. I talked in a recent video about practicing repetition in your home to get used to doing something so that it fits into your everyday routine so it's not overwhelming. And for me, that sauerkraut, it's just very easy to acquire cabbage and salt. I have all the supplies. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm not needing to look up anything, remind myself, how many tablespoons do I do for this or that. It simply is cutting up cabbage. I add about a tablespoon of salt per head of medium-sized cabbage. Now, these were really, really large. I got them from Azure Standard. So I did about a tablespoon and a half per head of cabbage. So 3 tablespoons in all for these 2 really massive heads of cabbage that packed out these 2 half-gallon jars tightly. So the key with fermenting is you want to pack it extremely tight so no air can get in, because air, oxygen, is the enemy of this whole process, and bacteria. So that's why you're taking salt, you're massaging it in, letting it create its own brine, packing it down extremely tight, and then using a folded cabbage leaf or a weight to keep it below the brine so no oxygen can get in and the good bacteria can take over while the salt inhibits the bad bacteria. That's the basic science of it. I like to use fermenting lids. They're basically almost look like a little bottle nipple. They let gases escape while keeping the oxygen out. So that's why they are so handy. I'll let this sit for a week, maybe 2. I'll taste it about halfway through. Our kitchen's pretty cold, so it can definitely go a lot longer than it would in the summer. I'm just looking for that nice sauerkraut flavor. I try to make these recipes very convenient for you to print off and use in your own kitchen. So again, farmhouseonboone.com, you can search for Zuppa Toscana soup and all of the measurements are there. This one has all the flavor because there's fresh garlic, there's sausage, there's bacon. It's another great place to incorporate homemade bone broth. For this one, I like to use homemade chicken broth preferably, but lately I've been getting from my sister's farm lots of chicken breasts just because they're so convenient. So I haven't been making a ton of chicken broth because for that you need lots of bones. And if you're making lots of whole chickens, you can pick the chicken all off, put what's left in a Ziploc bag or some other freezer safe thing. Label it, of course, but for me, I'm using it so often I don't usually even need to do that, and wait till you have enough to make a big pot of broth. I had saved some broth from cooking some ham bones and some chicken bones, so I have a combination here of pork stock and chicken stock. It all tasted delicious together. Of course, adding in plenty of salt to taste. When you're using homemade broth, that's especially important because, unless you added a bunch of salt in the process of making broth, it is flavorful, but as far as salt goes, quite bland. So you'll need to make sure to adjust for that. I find one of the easiest ways to make sure that you have enough salt is to taste a potato after it's been simmering a while, because the broth will taste real salty, but then after it simmers a while, all that broth kind of absorbs into the vegetables, especially the potatoes. And if they're salty, then it's usually good. To make this extra decadent, I add in some heavy cream. Another thing we have been relying very heavily on, which has nothing to do with winter, but just something that is filling for little bellies, which I think some of you might appreciate. I'm always looking for insight from other moms on what's currently working. What are you currently doing? Sometimes I'll hear something and I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. But for snacks and even for breakfast lately, we have been making some variety of chocolate protein milk every single morning, afternoon. Anytime somebody's a little bit hungry, we're just like, here, have some more milk. So we'll mix in usually some kind of protein powder. We have a few different kinds. We have colostrum. We will do honey, peanut butter, maple syrup, cocoa powder sometimes. A lot of times when Luke makes it, he'll add cinnamon instead of cocoa powder. Sometimes he adds cinnamon and cocoa powder. Really, there's just a bunch of different varieties, lightly sweetened, but it really goes down well for the kids. It makes for a nice protein-packed snack. We were in the habit of doing this for a while, but then we kind of got out of it, especially when we had a dairy cow and we had so much milk. We were trying to find ways to use a lot of milk and get it into our kids' diets. And then we go through phases where it's all yogurt, all milk kefir. Right now, though, this is something we've been doing every single day. I just use the immersion blender, but I don't do it on a full jar of milk. It needs to be, I'd say 2/3 full or even less, because it froths up when you go to use that immersion blender. It's been saving my sanity, especially on mornings where I don't really have a plan for breakfast or no bread and kids are sick of eggs. Just giving them some kind of protein-packed milk seems to really work, at least for a little while, and it's also a great snack. Even on mornings where we do have a big breakfast, we will still have each one of them drink a little jar of this. Okay, another thing that we have been loving in our home this season that I've been making over and over again, and I need to get it over on farmhouseonboone.com, is sourdough honey whole wheat dinner rolls. Now, I shared with you all recently how I have been doing all stretch and folds instead of using my mixer. I just find it easier because I don't have to stand there forever while it kneads. Just throughout the evening, I do a few more stretch and folds, and it becomes a little bit more developed with each one. And now, I also told you how you can take any recipe, add a little bit of sourdough starter in place of yeast to make a sourdough version. So mix the ingredients, do some stretch and folds throughout the evening, allow it to do a bulk ferment until about doubled, then shape them, allow them to rise again, and bake them. On my latest Azure Standard order, I did hard red wheat berries, so these are made with that. So they're hearty and fluffy and they're sweet and they pair well with just about anything. Now, I have to tell you that these were beautiful. They were so delicious. But I didn't get a picture of them. I had them sitting at our home while we went to church. I came home, grabbed them, brought them to my parents' house because we go out there on Sundays, baked them there. Everyone loved them with dinner. But trust me when I say they're fluffy, delicious, and the recipe will be coming soon to farmhouseonboone.com. What are you currently enjoying in your kitchen this winter? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to take the quiz to find your perfect trainer and get 14 days of free training with Trainwell down in the description box below.